Let me guess. You've tried visualization. You pictured your dream life, the career, the body, the apartment with perfect sunlight. Maybe even a version of you who somehow wakes up at 5 a.m. and smiling. And for a moment, it felt real. You felt inspired, energized, ready, and then nothing happened. You didn't become more consistent, you didn't magically fix your routines, and you didn't suddenly turn into the person you visualized. And here's something that nobody told you: you didn't fail. Your brain did exactly what its biology told it to do. Because when you visualize success the way that TikTok or Instagram quotes or half the self help industry teaches you, your brain cannot tell the difference between imagining success and achieving it. So instead of motivating you, it shuts your motivation off. I've seen this from both sides from my own life. Before becoming a software engineer, I used to work in psychology, helping people rebuild their motivation systems with real science. Later in engineering, I watched developers build side projects in their heads with their architecture, UI, the feeling that this is going to be huge and dopamine rush. And then the whole thing died in the GitHub graveyard. Different careers, but the same brain, the same trap. And today I'm going to show you how visualization often kills motivation and what to do instead so your brain actually moves towards your goal instead of checking out early. We hear about visualization from everywhere because it does feel incredible. Your brain gives you an instant hit of possibility, clarity, confidence, motivation, and honestly, hope. It really feels like progress. But when I worked in the psychology, I often noticed that my clients talked about similar pattern. Before coming to me, a lot of them had experience using visualization, but they used it as motivation. They were using it as a shortcut. They would imagine the result, feel incredible for 48 hours, and then nothing happened. They couldn't even start. Not because they were lazy, not because they lacked discipline, but because often visualization gives you false momentum. You get the emotional payoff before you've taken the first tiny step. And that trap comes straight from your brain's chemistry. 1997, Cambridge University. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz discovers something that flips motivation upside down. Dopamine doesn't spike when you get the reward, it spikes when you expect it. Motivation doesn't come from achievement, it comes from anticipation. So when you vividly imagine your dream job, the healthy body, the successful business, the perfect future self, your brain releases dopamine as if you've already achieved it. And once the dopamine hits, your brain goes like, great, we've already achieved that. And it stops pushing. This reminds me of developers when they write this to-do comment in the code, optimize this later. And they feel productive for 2 seconds because in their mind, they've already mapped up their optimization solution. But then they did nothing except for this comment and the function just rots there forever. Visualization works exactly the same way. Your brain caches the reward early. No tension, no drive, no movement. When I was about 17, I made my first vision board. Travel, career, perfect minimalist apartment. Now you would probably see it on Pinterest, the perfect desk setup, the perfect wardrobe. I printed, cut it, pinned it, and I was committed. For the first week, I stared at it constantly. But week 3, it kind of became part of the wall. And by week 6, I literally forgot that it existed. Psychology calls this figure ground perception. When something stays in the same place long enough, your brain just stops seeing it. I'll come back to my vision board experience later, but first I want to talk to you about this experiment that NYU psychologist Gabriele Oettingen conducted. So she divided people into 2 groups. Group 1 visualize the success, and Group 2 visualize the process, obstacles, efforts, reality, and the results. Shocking, but the group that visualized success, they actually performed worse. Even their blood pressure dropped, meaning that psychologically they entered the relaxation state, as if the goal had already happened. Meanwhile, people who visualized the process, they stayed activated, focused, motivated. Oettingen called this mental indulgence. Your brain eats the reward early and then refuses to get off the couch. If you ever designed the perfect morning routine, felt amazing about it, and then never followed it, that's mental indulgence. But you might tell me that athletes visualize. And yes, they do, but not the way Instagram tells you to. In 1995, a Harvard's neuroscientist Alvaro Pascal Leon found that mental practice rewires your brain the same way as the real practice, but only when visualization is process based. Olympic sprinters, they don't visualize the medal. They visualize exploding out of the blocks, the exact rhythm of their strides, the lean at the finish. Pianists visualize the finger movements. So you need to visualize the technique and not the outcome. Your brain responds to movement and not fantasy. If you write in a book, visualize opening a document and typing the first sentence. If you're building a digital product, visualize writing the first module of your code or debugging an error. That's how you keep dopamine in anticipation, the only place where motivation survives. So let's go back to that vision board I made at 17. Back then, I was just starting to study psychology. But as I took more classes, I started to realize what I was doing wrong. I hadn't lost motivation. My brain was treating the goal as if it was already achieved. So I changed the way how I visualize. Not the dream career, but opening a laptop and starting the first draft of my school paper. Not the perfect routine, but getting out of bed and making coffee. Not the future me, but the next tiny action. I would always ask myself, so what's next? And then, and next, and next, and what's the next step? And I still do it today. Before bed, and sometimes when I'm taking a shower, I would mentally rehearse the next morning. The first task I'll open, the first step I'll take, the first minute of coding or filming a YouTube video. It's never the fantasy, it's always the next step. And that's exactly what helped me get my master's degree in computer science, shaped real user facing products as a software engineer, and eventually build the first version of Fodoro. So remember earlier when I mentioned Gabriele Oettingen's research when she studied two groups of people who visualized the process and visualized the results? She wrote a book called Rethinking Positive Thinking, and I highly recommend this. And in that book, she describes something that I think I kind of been moving towards intuitively. Visualizing the steps instead of the final picture. And it finally helped me to understand why this approach worked so much better than my vision boards that I used to make as a teenager. Your research showed that when you focus on a process, your brain stays in anticipation mode. Not something like I already have it, but I'm moving toward it. And that's the state where motivation actually lives. In her book, she mentioned a framework she called WOOP that captures this idea. So WOOP stands for wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. And this framework creates just enough psychological tension to keep your brain engaged. Not overwhelmed, not checked out. The wish gives you direction. The outcome gives you meaning. The obstacle keeps you grounded in reality. And the plan gives you somewhere to go next. It's not hype, it's not fantasy motivation. It's a structured way to stay in motion instead of mentally finishing the goal before you even start. So, one thing I want you to remember, your brain is not lazy, it's just efficient. If it thinks that the job is already done, it will stop pushing. So here's the advice: don't visualize the finish line, visualize the first step, not the dream life, but the next tiny action, not the success, but uncomfortable moment that you usually avoid, not the fantasy, but the reps. Motivation doesn't come from having a goal. It comes from closing the gap between where you are and where you're going. If this gave you a new way to think about motivation, please hit like and subscribe. I make videos where psychology and engineering meet. And tell me in the comments, what's one small step you're taking tomorrow instead of visualizing the outcome? I'll see you next Monday.